Hi, everybody. My name's Julie. I'm an alcoholic. Oh, it's so wonderful to be here. I was telling Susan that after her 3 to 5 minutes, we could practically go home. My gosh, that was so wonderful to hear you. I want to thank the committee first for inviting me out here. As Susan said, I used to live in this area. I lived in San Francisco for a good 5 years and then lived in the East Bay for almost 5 years before moving to Iowa a couple of years ago. So we've spent the last several days touring around and got a chance to go to my old home group and spend a little bit of time with my old sponsor and my old great-grand sponsor and some former sponsees. This is a wonderful, wonderful area. I did a lot of growing up here. I learned a lot about sobriety. I learned a lot about working the steps that I have packaged up and taken with me wherever I go. So it's wonderful to be a part of this conference. It's wonderful to be back here in the Bay Area. One of the things that I want to tell you about me right off the bat is that if you haven't noticed, I'm very pregnant. And I've been having bizarre visions, like for a couple of weeks, that somehow my water's going to break at the podium. I'm due in 2 weeks, so keep your fingers crossed for me. I'm sure it would be a memorable talk. Probably one of my more memorable talks, but I'm going to try to, hang in there. I'm also suffering from some of the other later pregnancy symptoms, like I may have to leave for a couple of minutes, every 15 minutes or so, and I'm very prone to crying, so it could be a festival up here today. But it is one of the blessings and one of the miracles of my sobriety that I get to be a member of a family. I am a member of my family of origin. I'm a member of the family that I have been blessed with in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've been a member of my Alcoholics Anonymous families. This is a young people's meeting. I got sober when I was 16 years old on August 5th of 1987. I'm 31 years old now, so I've lived almost half my life sober. So a lot of my story begins on August 5th of 1987, but I feel like I should tell you a little bit of what my drinking was like before I get to the real juice. Like Susan, I had a tremendous amount of insecurity growing up. I used to have panic attacks for no reason. I remember feeling very suicidal at an early age, before there was any real reason to feel suicidal. I used to be afraid of people. I was afraid to go out and go to class, go to school, be a part of. When I was a young kid, I ate a lot. That was my first love. And so the more I ate, the bigger I got. The more I got teased, the worse I felt. The more isolated I felt. And so the story goes. When I picked up a drink for the first time, I didn't go out to drink. The first time I drank, or the first several times I drank, it was part of taking sips off dad's drinks, or my parents are pretty normal. Well, maybe they're not so normal, but they're not alcoholics. Let me put it that way. People who know my family know that they're not quite normal, but they are wonderful, loving people who did the very best that they could with me. I think I came out just restless, irritable, and discontent, and my poor mother had no clue what to do with this, psychotic, anxiety-ridden child that she was blessed with. So, I just had a difficult time of it. And I remember, my dad would have a gin and tonic every day when he came home, and they would crack open beers on the weekends, and it was, drinking wasn't a part of our family life, but, it was there, and I used to sneak it, and he would give me sips here and there, and, I loved it. I loved it so much that at a very early age I started looking for it. And as soon as I started looking for it, my life really changed. And it changed in a way that I really needed it to. I was suicidal enough that I honestly believe that my drinking career saved me from just offing myself right from the gate. I'd had a suicide attempt before I started drinking, and alcohol allowed me to live long enough to find Alcoholics Anonymous and to find a higher power of my understanding that carries me through one day at a time today. But when I started drinking, I was never one of those alcoholics who tried to hide it, who tried to maintain, who tried to pretend everything was fine. I didn't need to keep up my GPA. I didn't need to like maintain a certain level of friendships. I didn't need to make sure that my parents didn't know what was going on because I had found something that made me feel so rearranged inside that it was the most important thing. And, I drank for a short period of time, but the time that I drank, I really made every single drink count. And when I drank, anything that sort of stood between me and my next drink was history. And, and the consequences that I suffered from my drinking are nothing compared to some of the stories I hear in Alcoholics Anonymous, but they were enough to get me to my bottom. Some of the things that happened to me as a result of drinking were, I lost a lot of dignity. I lost a lot of self-respect. I lost my family. My family, bless them, did whatever they could to try to help me. They didn't quite understand what was going on. I think they checked out Al-Anon pretty early on. They tried to find ways to intervene in my drinking. For me, I knew I was crazy. My behavior was crazy, but the drinking was the solution. To me, the drinking was never the problem. It was always the thing that made me feel all right. But I had to pay a price for doing it. And my folks, I think they checked out Al-Anon early. They stayed a little bit, but then they discovered a book called Tough Love, and it became the new family Bible. They studied it chapter and verse, and they got really, really good at applying the principles of the Tough Love program in our family. So they offered me a series of ultimatums, and I'm sure a lot of alcoholics have had this experience of the people who love them saying, we love you, but you're hurting us when you drink, and we can't tolerate this anymore, and so if you continue to do this, these are your, this is the bottom line. And their bottom lines, because of this book, or because they were ready, I don't know, became more and more intense. And eventually, when I was about 13, 14 years old, I should go back and look at the records. I don't know if I was 13 or 14, but they reached their final straw and decided that they couldn't parent me anymore and signed their rights as parents over to the state of New York where I was living. And drinking took me into my very first detention center. I chose that life over anything else. But it wasn't a choice. It was like each time I was offered the ultimatum, I wanted to do better. I wanted to be good. I wanted to be a good kid. I wanted mom and dad to, not be crying all the time because I was breaking their hearts. I wanted to be a member of a family. But every time I drank, the choice went out the window. And, so you have to go to school. You have to follow the rules. You have to not hit your sister. You have to not steal from us. You have to, let us know where you're going. I couldn't do any of that. I could not do any of that. So I went into went through my first cycle of detention. They placed me in a foster home. The courts evaluated me to figure out what to do with this head case and tried to figure out if I belonged at home or forever institutionalized or somewhere in between. I was given my very first test for alcoholism, and I didn't pass. They told me that I had great potential for becoming an alcoholic, but that I was really too young to be an alcoholic, which I wholeheartedly agreed with. I appreciated that diagnosis. They told me that I needed to go to an educational type program, which was my first experience with a treatment center. We watched little movies about what AA or what alcohol does to your system and how bad drugs are, and we used to get loaded in the bathrooms on the break. We didn't get tested. We didn't, it was my first hoop, my first real hoop that I had to jump through, my court-appointed hoop that would get me home and out. The one thing that happened there, though, was we were required to go to one meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous to see what would happen if we really reached our potential. And I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and made sure that I introduced myself as an alcohol abuser because I didn't want you to think that I was anything like you whatsoever, that I still had some willpower and some control. Made a total fool out of myself, didn't connect, didn't feel a part of, didn't want to be a part of, and, but I completed successfully. I was allowed to go home, clean slate, let's start from scratch. So again, here I am, back at home, back at school, trying to do it, take a drink, can't do it. The consequences get more and more severe. My stretches of being kicked out of the house or running away are getting longer. and more frequent. I am homeless more of the time. I am getting to know my local police officers who are always picking me up because, I'm on probation. And I continued the cycle for a good couple of years. I had experiences where I was in detention where I was going to get out the next day, but the phenomenon of craving struck, and I ran away and sabotaged the entire thing because I needed to drink more than I needed to go home tomorrow. I needed to drink now. I was totally uncomfortable in my skin. Each time I got locked up, I was without a drink, and that was for me like a curse, the kiss of death. For me to be without a drink, without a solution, is it's unfathomable, it's unthinkable, it's cruel. Which is why in Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know, if I'm not working the steps, the steps have been a sufficient substitute and a sufficient solution to the way that I feel inside. Alcoholics Anonymous has made me feel the way I wanted drinking to make me feel, but I could never quite get there. And, without a drink and without a program, I am closer to suicide faster than you can believe. I am one of those people that just I need treatment. I need constant treatment. And when they took alcohol away, I was willing to do whatever it took to get some more. To shorten up my drunkalogue a little bit, I was court appointed to 2 more treatment centers. They got more intense in their degree. The next one was the next time I actually made the alcoholic cut. I was no longer potential. I was a full-fledged. So they sent me to an outpatient program where I had to go to meetings a couple of times a week, and I was required to write reports on my experience at AA meetings. So I would go in, and I would sit in the back, and I was supposed to write about what the topic was and how I felt and, my emotional experience at the meeting and how I related. And, so I was doing this stuff, but I was doing it as an assignment and not because I was connecting. I completed that program successfully. Clean slate, start again, can't do it, not an alcoholic, need to drink, and I'm off and running. Things are getting worse. I get picked up again, and this time I get sent out to Minnesota. Yeah. Minnesota. It was very cold. It was treatment center boom at that time. It was 1985. From 1985 to 1986, I went to a special facility for young people who had chronic relapsing problems, which meant that I had been to treatment before. I knew how to sit on the hot seat. I knew how to cry on command. I knew how to get through a group. I knew how to present a step. I knew how to do it. I knew how to be in a therapeutic community. I had tried to treat my alcoholism within the context of a therapeutic community before. I had been sentenced there. My parents had tried it. The school counselor had tried it. It didn't work. It wasn't a sufficient substitute for my alcoholism. So the one thing, though, that did happen in my 3rd treatment center is, again, we were required to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this final time in treatment, and I don't know if it was because my drinking took me to lower and more humiliating places. I don't know if it was because I was locked up long enough in treatment instead of in a detention center that some of the message got through. But I found myself, they took us out to a meeting once a week. We went out in the white treatment van. All of us juvenile delinquents piling out of the van, ruining this one meeting every single week. Because we were required to be there. The folks there welcomed us. I don't know if they hated our being there. If they did, they didn't act like they did. People welcomed us, told us to sit down. The steps and traditions were on the wall. They offered us coffee. And it was, I believe that I was attracted more to the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous first than I was the steps or anything else, because I didn't know it was the traditions at the time. But it didn't matter what I looked like, what I smelled like, what I sounded like, whether I wanted to be there or not. People were kind and people were welcoming. And for a drunk like me whose parents changed the locks on the house so that I could no longer come home, it was a unique experience to walk into a room that looked, clearly not as many people, but a lot of very attractive, smiling, bright-eyed, smiling people who were welcoming me in. And it had been a long time since I had been welcomed in anywhere, in an honest way. And I didn't trust it at first, and I didn't believe it at first, but I started to find myself looking forward to going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't get a sponsor there. I didn't necessarily think, I'm home, I'm an alcoholic, but it planted enough of a seed that I found this place and you people attractive. That when the time came that I was taking my first step, that I was conceding to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic, that I knew exactly where to go and exactly who to be with. And I am forever grateful for that group on a Saturday night at the University of Minneapolis, University of Minnesota, for making Alcoholics Anonymous attractive. I was released home. I was given a big book. I had worked some steps. We didn't work the steps out of the big book. We worked the steps out of some treatment center pamphlets. We worked the steps in a way that I didn't really connect with, but I did them more as requirements. I was required to write on the first step, and I had to present it to the group, and the group had to say whether or not, I had successfully accepted my alcoholism. I was required to draw a picture of who my higher power was going to be and present it to the group to see if it was a sufficient higher power. And the picture that I drew, actually, they told me it wasn't sufficient. They said I drew a picture of a guy who looked too much like Jim Morrison to be a true higher power. So I had to go back and I decided to draw a picture of a nature scene, and they said that was okay. So I had to start praying to nature. I had no reason to pray. I had no real need to pray except, please get me out of this place. I was required to do a fourth step. We didn't do it in column style. There were a series of questions that I was required to answer. I think the object was to discuss some of the more humiliating things, the more humiliating escapades that I had when I was drinking. And I was holding on to some things. I had a very difficult time being entirely rigorously honest in this pamphlet, so I left some really crucial items out. But I knew that if I presented this fourth step with those crucial things missing, that they would know. So I made up a couple of things in their place. And I had a rip-roaring, awesome fifth step that was not my fifth step, but I got high scores. I passed the fifth step with flying colors. I don't know whose fourth step I wrote, but I hope that person is sober somewhere. They gave me a pamphlet called Step 6 and 7, The Forgotten Steps, and told me to go home. So I forgot about the 6th and the 7th step, and I went home. They told me to get a sponsor. They handed me a big book. The speaker last night was sharing about, I don't know how many of you were here last night to hear the speaker. He was great last night, sharing about his high school yearbook and the entries of from his alcoholic drinking in the yearbook. And, I'm like 15, 16 years old when I'm heading home from treatment. I still have my big book that turned into like my version of my yearbook. Like my treatment center friends, like, rock on, stay sober. You can do it, I know you can. That's about it, like the camaraderie and the socialization that I am equipped with as an adolescent. Frightening. So I go home with this big book, and every time I want to read it, I'm either reading it because I'm missing my friends, and I'm reading the things that they wrote to me, or I'm suffering from intense insomnia. And every time I crack it open to Bill's story, war, fever, ran high. Like, out like a light every single time. I had no connection to the big book, no connection to the literature, but, I considered myself a member of AA. I went to meetings. I made some friends. There were some young people. There were some old people. I hung out. I didn't hang out with the desperation that I hang out now. But I went, and I stayed sober for 10 long months. Five of those months were in treatment, and 5 of them were when I went home. I drank one more time. Half measures avail us nothing. I was half measuring. I was maybe even quarter measuring. And if half measuring produced half results, I would still probably be half measuring. I would be miserable and, like walking in and out of the meeting, not hanging out, not like working with a sponsor, forgetting about step 6 and 7 still. I would be one of those miserable people who is not treating my alcoholism by hanging out in AA. So I drank, and I'm grateful for that last drunk. And I'm grateful for that last drunk. It was different from any other drunk I've ever experienced. It was different for me because I hadn't planned it. I didn't think I was going to drink. Like I said, I thought I was a member of AA. I was doomed to a life of like bowling and coffee, and But yeah, I still showed up and I hung out, and I did what I thought I was supposed to do. And I went out one night to the movies, and I ran into an old drinking friend who was drinking a wine cooler. I hadn't seen her in a while, and she handed it, "Hey, what's up?" Handed it to me, and I'm drinking it, like out of the blue, completely out of the blue. Struck with a drink in my mouth, going down my throat. Had no thought even crossed my mind that like, oh, alcohol, let's recoil, as if from a hot flame. Nothing. I had nothing standing between me and that drink. There was no higher power. There was no defense. And I drank it. And the next thought that comes to mind is like, oh no, here I am. I'm drinking again. I have to change my date. I've worked so hard for 10 months of sobriety, holding on and the next thought, as any good alcoholic would have, is like, if I'm going to blow this time, it's not going to be over this little sip of a wine cooler, let me tell you. So I went out and, I had myself a good long drunk. Now, long meaning a week, maybe less than a week. I don't know how long it was. All I know is that I tried to consume as much alcohol and put other chemicals into my body as I could. And it was the first time in my life when I knew that drinking was the solution, and it was the solution that was no longer working. That I couldn't get drunk. I couldn't drink the AA out of my head. I couldn't get you guys out of my mind. And I knew on some level that I belonged here. And it was the most painful, devastating drink I have ever had, because it didn't do for me what I needed it to do. It failed. It totally stopped working. And I knew that like any normal, rational person would get themselves out of the situation I was in, which was like, staying in some guy's basement. This guy was listening to, I met him through my cousin. I don't even remember his name, but like my folks kicked me out again. I'm living on the street because all I want to do is drink. And I'm staying in some guy's basement who is listening to side B of Jesus Christ Superstar over and over and over again and crying. And here I am, drinking as much as I possibly can. Like, I have no idea who this guy is or what his deal is, but I knew that if I left there, I would, then I would be on the streets trying to drink. And, I'm like, hello? What is this? And I remember having that moment of clarity, and thank God I had that moment of clarity where I knew where I belonged. I knew I belonged with you guys. And I called somebody up, and she came and picked me up, and August 5th, 1987, I got to go home. I don't know why my parents let me come home that final time. They usually didn't. It was usually like, go dry out, go back to the detention center. We don't want to have you. You ruin our home. You ruin our lives. You break our hearts. You make us miserable. But for some reason, the fight was gone. I remember calling them up from my friend Hillary's house, who came and picked me up off my last drunk, and I couldn't say I was sorry. I couldn't say I was wrong. I didn't have any words to explain why I had drank again. There was no fight left. I was just done. I couldn't explain to them what had happened or what had changed or how I was going to do it different, and please, oh please, and this time I really mean it. I was without words. It was the most profound feeling of willingness I have ever experienced in my life. And I think that on some level, they heard it or they knew it, and they let me come home and they let me sleep it off. And I went to a meeting on a Sunday night, and I raised my hand. In my town where I got sober, Rochester, New York, they had seen me raise my hand a number of times as a newcomer. And I went back to this meeting, and I didn't try to explain my last drunk. I wasn't interested in it. I just knew that I was done, and I was going to throw myself on the mercy of whoever would have me, and I was going to do whatever they told me. And I introduced myself as a newcomer again. Tears streaming down my face, and just miserable. And thank God, a bunch of women came up to me after that meeting, and they surrounded me. They were kind, and they were wonderful. And I got a bunch of, like those AA slips of paper. Go home with, a dozen every night with, call anytime. And I found a woman there who was willing to be my sponsor. And we started to work the steps. And when I started working the steps, my life started to change. I worked them in an entirely different way this time. I didn't work them out of pamphlets. I didn't work them because they were an assignment. I worked them as if they were going to save my life. I had no idea how they were going to save my life or why they were going to save my life, or if I was really going to get to have the experience that I saw other people have, which is to light up and to feel peaceful and to laugh and to feel comfortable, which so many of you seem to be able to feel. And I would just, I was bunched up all the time. I just wanted that so badly, and I didn't know that if I did the work of the steps, that the end result was going to be that I was going to feel a part of, and I was going to feel like I belonged on the planet, that I was going to feel freedom from the bondage of the obsession for alcohol. I didn't know, but I had to have some level of faith that it was going to work for me the same way it worked for you people, and I'm so glad it did. I mean, you don't know the steps are going to work until you work them. But I had enough desperation to work them, and they worked, and they still work. When I was a few days sober, I met my higher power. My first version of my higher power was not Jim Morrison. It was not a rolling brook through a shady landscape. My higher power came to me out of desperation the same way the first step came to me out of desperation. I was sober a couple of days and I wanted to drink, and I wanted to drink almost more than I wanted to stay sober. You know how it is, like you're sober a couple of days and had a few good nights sleep, had some good meals, like a little fresh, I got to wear clean underwear. It's like feeling pretty good, Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. Maybe, wouldn't it be fun and blah, blah, blah. Have 100 slips of paper, say call any time, don't drink, don't pick up, can't call them. But I remember hearing all you guys talking about how you get on your knees and you talk to God. So I figured I'd try it. And I got on my knees and I dared God to keep me sober. I looked up at the ceiling, like, don't know who you are, don't know what you can do, don't know if you even care, but please, please keep me sober because I think I don't want to drink tonight. I don't remember the exact words, but the feeling was desperation, and I had no clue what I was praying to. I was praying to the ceiling. I was praying up. I was praying in the hope that something was up there listening. And I had a feeling of just complete peace wash over me. I wouldn't say that I had a white light experience like Bill Wilson shares about in the Big Book, but I definitely had a profound spiritual experience where, for the first time in my life, I wanted to drink really, really bad, and I didn't. And that is the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had wanted to drink and not drank before, but I was locked up, and I had to find a way to escape to drink. But I had never been in a position where I could have left, I could have drank, I wanted to drink, and I felt peaceful enough from a prayer that I could not, that I didn't have to drink. And I laid my head down, and I went to sleep. And I woke up the next morning, and the seed of faith was planted. And I didn't know still who I was praying to, but I knew that this praying up worked. And I didn't say any these or thous or those. And I had no concept of what a religious prayer was. I had no experience. So I just kept talking to God as if God was like anybody. And I just kept asking God to watch over me and protect me and keep me sober. And God watched over me and protected me and kept me sober. And the more days I was able to string together, the more steps I was able to work, the more comfortable I started to begin to feel, the more of an opportunity I had to work the following steps. I finally sat down and wrote a real honest-to-God fourth step, and I wrote about those things that I wanted to hide, that I didn't want to share, that I thought I would take to my grave. I shared them with my sponsor, and she gave me a big old hug and was like, okay, 6 and 7 are next. Like, no, those are the forgotten steps. I said, no, they're not. And I put together a list of amends, of people that I needed to make amends to, and I set out making amends. And I got to say, though, that I was, I don't want to sound as if I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I worked the steps, and then all my problems vanished. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous a total mess. I was a 16-year-old hormonal nightmare, and I had no concept how to live on the planet with like regular, normal, working, productive people. And, when I first got sober, I thought that finally I was sober. My parents were going to like, oh, she's sober, live at home. You don't have to work. Sobriety is enough. You don't have to go to school. You're sober. And my parents were not those kind of people. Like, these are the tough love parents, and they did not change when I got sober. So, I dropped out of high school right away, early in sobriety. I think my hair was still like black and half shaved. I wasn't working, and my parents issued an ultimatum. You got to do something or you got to leave. I was like, no, I'm sober. You don't understand, it's different this time. So they gave me a month, and after a month they were like, bye. So I had my first experience being kicked out of the house in sobriety. I was 17 years old, and I moved in with a dear friend who I had gone to high school with, who was also sober, and we had the first like young people's apartment. So we ended up having a swinging pad hangout for all of our young people friends. And I started working. I had to learn how to live life. I had no concept how to have a job. I didn't have an alarm clock. I didn't have dishes. I didn't know how to do my laundry. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. And thank God I got those women's numbers right in the beginning. And I had met a couple of women who absolutely carried me through those first several years of sobriety. They were old. They were probably about my age now. Then that was really dangerously old. They lived about a half a block from each other, and they each had 4 kids. They were sober, and one of them was single, the other one was married, and she and her husband were sober, and if I wasn't at one of their houses, I was at the other. And we weren't working steps 9 to 5, but we were talking and getting to know each other. And the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous sprung up in those kitchens as I hung out with them in their homes and helped them make dinner for their families and helped them do laundry in their houses and just hung out because, I don't even know that I was invited, to be perfectly honest. I just showed up. They were wonderful, wonderful women who taught me a great deal about how to live sober, how to show up, how to wake up when the alarm clock rings, and how to fold your laundry and put it away when you're done. And they taught me how to be a friend. And they showed me how to be a family member because I had no clue how to take what I was learning back home to my own family, in which my alcoholism had destroyed so intensely. When I got to the 9th step, I didn't go back to my family and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry were like the 2 most empty words I could utter in my home. I had no idea how to make right all the wrongs that I had created in my house. But I learned how to show up in another person's family. And I was able to take what I learned in their homes and bring it back to my mom's home, my parents' home. When they invited me for dinner, I showed up and I tried to be a family member among family members. I tried to do the dishes. I tried to be polite. I tried to make everything not about me and my alcoholism. I tried to make it not about how I was a miraculous success story. I just tried to show up and be a part of. Because drunk or sober, I really, really need you to know that I'm special. And I need to be treated that way. Okay? All right? And it wasn't working at home, so I tried it a different way, and I would go home and just try to be a part of, and it was an amazing journey, and I wasn't very good at it, and I didn't do it very gracefully, but you people taught me to keep doing it, and keep doing it, and keep doing it. Eventually, I went back to school. I decided that being a high school dropout was no longer my gig, and I wanted to get some education, so I went back to community college and earned the equivalent of my high school diploma. And then I decided at 4 years sober that it was time to move. And that's when I left Rochester, New York, and moved to San Francisco. Why, you ask? I don't know. Just seemed like a fun thing to do. So I moved to San Francisco, and I moved in the context of a relationship, my first love in sobriety. Boy Meets Girl on AA campus. It's my favorite way to do it. I highly recommend it. I've had lots of fun in AA that way. It's nice to come in young, too, because you have lots of time to create some wreckage. So my first love and I, we moved to San Francisco together, and I hung out with him a whole lot and was kind of afraid to go to meetings. I would go to meetings, but they didn't know how special I was. People at home knew I was special. It was really hard. I wanted to make it the topic of conversation. Hi, there's somebody new. It's me, and I'm special. And it just wasn't happening. So I put my relationship at the time in between me and God and me and sobriety, and I lost that relationship pretty quickly and pretty tragically. But what it did was it drove me right back to AA, and it drove me into service in San Francisco. I found a new sponsor in San Francisco, and I started doing some H&I work there. I started to get really active. I helped start a Young People's Big Book Study, and became my home group and became very active in that. Started going back to school again, found a lot of success in school, started living life, was young, hip, and sober in San Francisco, couldn't imagine a better life. And then, boy meets girl on AA campus again, a couple years later, and all is well. And then all of a sudden, I find myself in this horrible predicament. I'm pregnant. I had no idea how it happened. I was struck pregnant one day. I was like, God, what are you thinking? This is me. No. So I, without a second thought, without hesitation, went down to the clinic and had an abortion. And it was one of the darker times in my sobriety. I did it without thinking. I did it without knowing that I necessarily wanted to. I was in a relationship that was, I think we were living together at the time, but it, didn't know if it was the one or going to be it or whatever. And I was really scared. And I went into a pretty dark time and was really depressed for a good solid 2 or 3 months. Didn't want to do anything, but had got myself wrapped up enough in Alcoholics Anonymous that I couldn't stop showing up. I had just enough commitments that I continued to come. And then I found myself pregnant again. I was like, how is this happening? I don't mean to be pregnant. I don't want to be pregnant. I'm trying not, I'm having, no, this is not supposed to be happening to me. And I find myself pregnant again. Some methods are 99%, and I'm the one. I guess I am special in some arenas. So I find myself pregnant, and I just knew. I knew it the same way I knew that very first time I prayed, that God was caring for me and loving me in a way and making decisions for me in a way that I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I knew it was time for me to have a baby. I was young and hip and trying to be living my single whatever life in San Francisco. And I'm like, okay, I guess it's time to have a baby. I had no clue how I was going to do it. And I entered a phase in my sobriety that stopped being about really active and really out there. I was of service and I continued to show up and I was active and I was out there, but it stopped being about that frenetic out there doing stuff all the time. And I had to go to a new place with God. I had to go to a place where I didn't know how somebody like me who was just trying to go to school and working part-time and in a tenuous relationship and how I was going to be a parent. I had botched being a daughter so badly that I had no experience and no clue what a real normal relationship was going to be like, and I had no idea how I was going to do it. And and things actually got a lot worse before they got better. I ended up in my pregnancy with my relationship going way down the tubes, way fast, in a very ugly way, with me trying to hold on and make it work. The father of the baby started seeing somebody else, but forgot to break up with me first. I didn't know it at the time, but it was one of those. When it finally came out, it was one of those big, grand, humiliating AA shows. You know what I mean? We were all in the grapevine, and I don't mean our meeting in print. And I was humiliated, and then it was confirmed. I was alone. I was single. I was a single mom. I had no idea how I was going to support myself. I had no idea what I was going to do, and I went to a place with God that was out of just sheer desperation, where I had no idea what was going to happen the next day, but I was living one day at a time. And I happened to be involved at the time in a conference called ACCIPA. And I was the registration co-chair of this particular conference that was in Pleasanton. And And I had to show up. It was getting close to the time of the conference, and I had to show up and make all these registration badges, and I had to sit at this registration table and welcome and greet like countless alcoholics. And it literally saved my life. And when I signed up to do it, I had no idea that it was going to be that for me. I thought it was going to be kind of cool to be part of a service, structure that I hadn't experienced before. But what it did was it literally saved my life, because I had to show up and I had to be around people, and I was around alcoholics. I was around people who knew me, who knew my ex, who knew his new girlfriend, who knew the whole situation. And I was pretty messy at first, but luckily had a sponsor, and I just did the best I could. My son totally changed me in amazing ways that I couldn't even describe to you now. I used to talk about how, looking at him was like looking at the face of God, and now looking at him sort of sends me to my knees on a daily basis in a whole different way. He is 6 years old now, and I did the single mom thing for a couple of years, and he is, for anybody who knows him, will abundantly confirm, just a gorgeous, amazingly beautiful boy. And he might have this thing, and I need to let that go. I mean, he's 6, and I'm already envisioning him with a shopping cart and a needle in his arm. You know what I mean? He's in kindergarten, and he's been to the principal's office half a dozen times in kindergarten. Oh. And I'm having another one. Insane? Maybe. But God has called me to higher things, When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I came here just wanting to be sober out of desperation. And what I've gotten are things that I never thought I wanted. I've gotten to be a mother and a friend and a sponsee and a sponsor. I now am a wife as well. I'm not allowed to talk about that. My husband has a superstition about sharing about the success of your relationship from a podium. If I tell you how good it is, it'll end. But I think I'm allowed to say that Boy Meets Girl on AA campus is awesome. And that without a program, I am not fit to be in a relationship with a dog, let alone another human being. I have to work a vigilant program to be on the planet with you people, but when I work a program and I'm vigilant about working my program, I get to experience relationships beyond my wildest dreams. And that's as a wife, that's as a mother, that's as a daughter, that's as a friend, that's as a sponsor and a sponsee, that's as, maybe even an in-law, who knows. My husband's the only one that'll laugh at that one. I continue to work the steps in my daily life. I moved a couple of years ago, like I said, to Iowa City. We are there for a temporary period of time, temporary meaning for like 5 years or so, while we are doing some graduate work there. We have a little house. We have a nice little AA community. I moved there, and I wanted to raise my hand and say, "Hi, I'm new, and I'm special." You don't know what a gem you have from the Bay Area. They didn't recognize it right away, and a lot of them are still trying to catch on to the idea. I keep pushing it, but They don't always do it right, but man, they stay sober, so they do it right. They do it their way right. I struggled for the first year, the same way I struggled when I moved to San Francisco, the same way I struggled trying to show up and be a part of a community that it was like you go to AA and it's instant camaraderie, but when it comes down to friendships, they take time and they take work and they take effort. And, I had to put in some time and some work and some effort. But I had an experience a couple of weeks ago. We had a couple of my girlfriends there threw Matt and I a baby shower. And I was amazed. I have that same, I still, any party that I'm remotely connected with, nobody's going to show up. Nobody's going to come. Oh, right, I'm going to go to Julie's party. Ha, ha, ha. That's how I think. I show up to this place. It's packed full, standing room only. All of AA and my little Iowa City community is showing up and giving me hugs and wishing me well and telling me how much of a difference and an impact our moving there has made on their town and their lives and their sobriety. And finally, they understand who I am. I was moved to tears. I was literally moved to tears, and it reminded me of my going away party that we had here in the Bay Area, where the house was packed, and I got to be surrounded by people that I love and who I've got to walk this journey with, and it reminded me of my going away party in Rochester, New York. That was very similar. It was a group of people who surrounded me and loved me and sent me off with well wishes, and it just is a really profound way to live, to get sober young and to grow up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and to have lived in 3 very different places with very different people, with very different AA. But all the AA that I've experienced has been out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and all of the steps are the same. Whether you open a book in New York, California, or Iowa, the steps are on the same page and they work the same way. And even though the faces change, the program works, and God is there. And it has been amazing for me to learn how to be flexible, to learn how to show up, to know that, like, going to jail in San Francisco set me up for going to jail in Iowa. I mean, you know, S-H-and-I, not like... But the things that I've learned in my sobriety, I've gotten to carry with me and pass on. And, you know, I love the friendships and the experiences that I've had here in AA, and I've had them through turning those dark, horrible, hideous memories of drinking into the most precious, priceless assets when I carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where it starts. And I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different sponsors, and I've learned a lot from every sponsor I've worked with. And I've worked with a lot of sponsees over the years, too, and I learned so much by being just a very small part of this very big whole that is Alcoholics Anonymous, by putting my hand in CJ's and Barbara's and Diane's, and then putting my hand in, you know, my sponsees and their sponsees, and, you know, and just being a part of this deal is so amazing. I carry it home, and I carry it back with my family. Now, I shared earlier that I had a really hard time going back to my parents' house and saying, I'm really sorry. I know my drinking was really, really bad, and I didn't mean to hurt you, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, my amends to my family had to be very real, and the way that they are real and continue to be real is that I incorporate what I've learned here in my home with my parents. My parents live now in Indianapolis, which is a 6-hour drive from where we live. And I have been able to see my parents since they've moved probably about every 6 weeks or so. My amends to my parents come in the form of inviting them to my college graduation. They come in the form of inviting them to my baby showers. They come in the form of inviting my dad to walk me down the aisle and give me away at my wedding. They come in the form of calling my mom up even when I don't have that much to talk about and asking her how her day is. They come in the form of inviting them to experience the birth of my child now. My mom wants to come watch the baby be born. My mom has gone back to school in her later life and is now a massage therapist. So I thought this would be a good idea. She wants to study up and practice on my back while I'm in labor. Okay, so we can't go into labor in California. She won't be able to make it. She tells me in her own way that my dad wants to come too. My dad is a very, very special man, and I have the honor and privilege of inheriting many of his finer traits. Stubbornness being one of them, always being right being another. And my mom informs me several months ago that my dad wants to come too. And would my mom kindly talk to me about that? And Mom says, no, you talk to her about it. But Mom can't let go enough to not say anything to me about it. Mom has to mention it to me just in case he says something about it so that I might be sensitive in my response. This is a beautiful family dynamic that I've lived with for, my whole life. And the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me to not be in a standoff, to not be unkind for the sake of being unkind, but But to let him do his thing and to let him, to just try to see what happens. Turn it over, ask God for help, see what happens. So the last time they came to visit, they came a couple weeks ago to my baby shower, to our baby shower. And I asked my dad if he's coming when the baby's going to be born, and he says, well, I wasn't planning on it because I didn't really have much of a part. So I say to my dad, well, I was thinking it would be really great if you could hang out with Zach while I'm in labor. You could stay in our house and be a familiar face and a loving grandpa while we're all at the hospital. And my dad, without hesitation, says, I can do that. I want to do that. I'll be there. And it doesn't sound like much, but it's a miracle in Alcoholics Anonymous that I can have that level of an interaction with the parents who changed the locks on the house so that I couldn't come home, who literally stood in front of me in court and told the judge that they couldn't have me, that they didn't want me, that they couldn't control me. To watch my mom go from a desperate, crying, pain-stricken parent because she had no idea if her daughter was going to live or die, to be so excited that she calls me up and says, I read about this new technique and I can't wait to rub your back, and just I don't think this stuff is it may not sound much, but to me it is the world. It is the life that I never knew I wanted, and the life that continues to unfold. I have no idea what it's going to be like when I give birth. Nothing's happening. I'm still doing okay. Almost done, hanging in there. Really happy about that. But I got to say that sometimes I don't know where Alcoholics Anonymous ends and my family and my life begins, and I have to tell you that I really like it like that. That I don't know where I stop, I don't go to a meeting and then I leave the meeting and then something else happens. That I've learned how to bring what I've learned here into all areas of my life. And I still don't do it gracefully, and I still don't do it 100% well, and I still need the help and guidance of a sponsor and a higher power, and I still need to give it away, and I still need to go to jail and give it away, and I still need to be in general service and be active in my district, and I still need to have a home group. But you know what? I've watched life take people out of AA. AA has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. And for me, the answer isn't to go and live it and forget AA. It's to grasp AA and bring it with me into that life. And I have had an amazing, amazing life. I have turned into the kind of person that I used to panhandle from, really. I think I used to look down on people like me when I was hanging out in the gutter, trying to scrape together enough to drink. I used to make fun of people like me, and I just become more of one of those people every single day. And it's an amazing experience to grow up in Alcoholics Anonymous, to be sober half a life, and to be able to look out and know some people and not know others. I want to welcome anybody who's new to AA. We don't get to ask newcomers to introduce themselves in their first 30 days in big meetings like that. But if you're new, would you raise your hand so that the people around you can welcome you? There's one in the back. A few over here. Welcome. I will leave it up to the people around you to be responsible to welcome you in the way you deserve to be welcomed to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm grateful to be here, and I will sit down. Thank you.